Yeah, well, you know, that's like just your opinion, man.
So hello and welcome to the Audio Opinion Show, where audio people gather and talk about their opinions about things, because what else have we got to do? I'm hanging out here with some of my friends and some of my new friends and some of my old friends. I think we're mostly, I didn't ask a couple of these guys what they usually do, but I think we're mostly sound reinforcement folks. So sorry to all the post-production guys and field guys and whatever. You need to jump on and talk, because otherwise it's just a bunch of PA people talking about speakers. So, and that's what we're stuck with. So anyway, welcome to the panel. Welcome to everybody. We're going to start off with our first polling question. And the first polling question is the most important polling question if you're following along at home. The poll question for today, the first question, and I will read it for those on YouTube who can't see it. At the end of The Princess Bride, which is the greatest movie of all time? What does Fezzik bring to the castle to help them all escape? 1, swords. 2, 5 horses. 3, a wagon. 4, a Holocaust cloak. 5, none of the above. Or 6, all of the above. I don't get a vote because I'm hosting, so everyone else vote early and vote often. Let me see, we have 4, 5, 6. How many folks do we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, I think we're all there. So we are going to hit end poll and share the results. And the winner for everyone is all of the above, which is not correct. The actual answer is none of the above. He brought 4 horses because there are 4 of us. Because you brought the lady. Hello, lady. So anyway, it's 4 horses. Now you know. The rest of y'all need to watch the movie another 400 times, because your game is weak. Weak. Really? A wagon? You thought he brought a wagon and swords? Like, what? No. He wasn't the sword guy. No, that was Inigo. Like, anyway, if
Somebody
Jason
was carried around in a wagon, he was numb, so he couldn't walk. You had to drag him around in a wagon. That's what I was thinking.
That happened earlier in the movie. That is true, and there was a Holocaust cloak involved, but that was earlier, not at the end of the movie to help them escape.
Trick question.
That's how they got into the castle.
Question. That's part of the fun. It's if I can make everybody look wrong, then it's the opinion show, so I can make everybody look wrong and me right. That's the whole point. That's why we're here.
Isn't that the only part of the movie of this that isn't an opinion now? I mean, those are like facts, right?
This is factual. This is factual. Fact 1, it's the greatest movie of all time. Fact 2, he brought 4 horses at the end to 4 white horses to help them all get away. All right, so let's flip over to our topic. And so we've got 6 possibilities. We will vote amongst those 6. The 7 of you will vote, so there won't be a tie. So our topic, it's labeled second topic, but it's really going to be our topic. Speaker systems. Do we like Myers or Martins or JBLs or D&B or whatever? Console channel layout. Do you do drums first? Do you do vocals first? Do you care? Are we interested in sound reinforcement, or do we want things to be larger than life and big and like powerful? 4th is the boring intercom thing that nobody ever chooses, but someday I'll make everybody talk about it because it's one of my favorites. RTS versus Clearcom versus Riddle versus whatever. 5, lake processing for your speakers versus using the manufacturer processing. And 6, which is what I knew everybody was going to pick, and that's pretty much what's going to happen. Time alignment. What gets timed to what? And it was closer than I thought. All right, so ending the poll, sharing, and it looks like 4 of us are going to have fun, and the 3 of us are just going to be stuck talking with something that they didn't want to talk about. Time alignment. What gets timed to what? And to start our conversation, I am going to pick on, I don't know, Dave Rittenhouse, why don't you start us off on PA timing and what you like to time to what and why?
What is the zero mark?
Question. To be or not to be zero, that is the question.
Exactly. Well, first of all, it depends on what you're timing. Let's just talk main PA first of all. I'll always take my mains. I'm going to move those back to the back line. If we're talking music, I'm going to move those to the back line, to a kick drum, to amps, whatever. Then I work myself around the PA. So if I'm doing outfills, I'll time those back to the mains. I'll time front fills to the mains. Then I will go ahead and take my subs. I will use Smart to actually get a signal from the mains on the subs, and then time the subs to the mains. That's usually my process of walking time alignment around.
Well, that seems terribly logical. I think we're done.
Now we can talk about that intercom stuff.
Now we can talk about that intercom stuff that everybody else.
What if the back line is staggered? What do you align then?
Usually I'll take whatever a key element is. If it's rock and roll, it's usually either amps or a kick drum or a snare, something like that. If it's something more intimate, it'll usually be like an acoustic piano. I've done that many times as well. So it's kind of depending upon what the information is.
Dare we bring up if it's like some band that has the dreaded runway that goes out into the middle of the audience where they do the acoustic set?
That is the toughest thing ever. I swear to God. Yeah. And getting that, usually it's a country singer running out on the ego thrust.
When they run out, do you flip polarity on one main stack so that there's a null there?
No.
That's semi-clever. That's or you double up the input and reverse one and put it left and put the other one right, so that at least those inputs that are coming in from there are that's an interesting, that's tricky. That's clever. I'll give you that. I don't know if it would work, but it seems like it would.
It's like
I actually did an
Dave
event.
Rat type of stuff.
Actually, I accidentally did that at an event, and I am sad to say I didn't notice, but we were all sitting there listening. Me and a bunch of other sound guys were like, "Sounds really good." Walking around, and you're like, And then I get to the end of the event, and I was like, "Oh, one of the mains is flip polarity." So,
oops. I mean, it is one of those things where it's like there's really only like one spot, and even then, once you throw in room reflections and everything else, you know what I mean? It's like you'd hear it if you were listening for
especially because it was more deployed as a mono system, so mono zone. So it wasn't like we're not covering the same area with the same with two speakers.
Right.
So,
yeah. Obviously, if it was, exactly. Well, it's like, I mean, not to drive us immediately off topic, but back in the olden days with all the trap boxes and horizontal arrays, and everybody was, always screaming about the comb filtering that happened in the overlap between the cabinets and how terrible it was and how awful it was. And it's like, well, yeah, it sounds awful when you like walk across the speakers and you walk through the comb filtering zone. But if you just stand in one place, it kind of sounds okay. Like, no, it's not perfect. I mean, it's there's a reason why we sort of kind of went away from that model. But the reality is that most people are not walking up and down the rows listening to the comb filter changes over 5 seats. They're just standing in this place, and this place like, oh, this sounds okay. Like, not really realizing that there's a notch at 837 and a notch at 1674 or something. Like,
The processing power has increased like 100-fold between the days of point source boxes and line arrays too. And I would be interested. I mean, I heard some great point source arrays. I heard some great shows on that stuff. And I would be curious to see like what bringing that kind of processing to that field would do for, you know, a point source. And I am not for a second advocating that we should all go back to point source boxes and trap boxes and all that other stuff. But I think that a lot of the inherent problems that were with them might have been mitigated somewhat by having the level of processing of every single driver
Oh yeah.
that we have now.
I can't remember the details, and I probably should, because it was a whole bunch of famous people in the industry that did it. But they actually put together an old school like 850 rig or 750 rig or something.
That was recent.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Andy.
That was recent. Yeah, there was an article about that.
And it was like, you know, Guinness from EAW and like, you know, some other folks or Forsyth or whatever, and they put some newer drivers in there, and they applied, you know, modern processing and ran it analog, you know, with an analog console or whatever, just as kind of a, you know, what could you do? I would have liked to have, I mean, you know, one of the comments they did make was, oh, here's our comb filtering back again. Like, I mean, at a certain point, you're overlapping, you know, it is what it is. But at the same time, there was some real huge advantages to working in that way. And I mean, Danley is still basically working from a point source. You know, how much of a point source can we get? How point sourcey can we make this so that as many frequencies as possible are coming out of the, you know, or seeming to come out of the smallest possible point. And lots of people buy their stuff.
Supposedly, I'm hearing that the Danley stuff isn't affected by wind the way line arrays are. Like line arrays, as the wind comes in, all the high end blows away. Everybody knows about this.
Right.
The trap boxes used to be better than that. Even though you had comb filtering, the wind didn't seem to blow the sound away. Now I'm hearing, I have never heard a Danley system, but I've heard that some of those point source arrays, even in high wind, will not, the sound doesn't blow away. Is that true?
Well, and I mean, I think the answer is yes, and ish, like most things. One, I'm not a super expert on this, and three, I'm just going to speak my opinion anyway, because that's the point. But I do think I think that the whole process of a line array working involves intentional interference between multiple drivers, which means that the time coherence and not coherence of those very specific, it becomes extremely critical that it be exactly right. The second that you introduce, let's move the air molecules around, and you've got things coming from different directions, which means that these molecules are being affected slightly different than these molecules, things start to fall apart. Whereas if everything's basically coming from a point source, the sound may, it just doesn't fall apart in nearly the same way, which makes sense and is in alignment with, you know, what I remember from the old school point source PAs. Because basically, you know, we would put a long throw box up on the top of the PA that would have like a 40-degree pattern, you know, and it was like a mid-range box and a high-end frequency box, and just to try to, you know, throw some extra high-end longer distance. The reality is almost anywhere that you were far away from the PA, you were probably only hearing one box, maybe two, but probably mostly one box, which means that, yeah, then the wind was not going to have the same kind of effect because it's really only moving one signal. With a line array, almost anywhere you stand, you're hearing four boxes or three boxes or whatever. You're intentionally hearing the interference between them because that's what's creating the line array effect. And that is also inherently creating problems when you start getting the wind blowing around. And I'll stop talking because I don't know what I'm talking about.
Well, I would love to continue the discussion on line arrays versus point source. I'm wearing my Danley shirt, by the way, but
well, there you go.
Time alignment. So if we want to get us back on track, I have experimented with the thought of, so on like Allen Heath consoles, you get a delay per input, and delaying the drum set to, say, the snare, every single part to it, which would be the opposite, really. I wish they would make a like inverse for delays, where it delays all the other channels more than whatever you're doing. because that's really what you need to do in that situation. I want the snare to be the shortest time, and I need to delay the snare to the sound that it takes to get to the overhead. And so has anyone experimented with that, getting away from system alignment to?
Well, no, and actually that's exactly part of the question. It's the timing, and what are we timing to, and what are we considering? Because that's, yeah, I mean that's essentially in pop music, and it's not wrong necessarily. You're kind of just saying the snare is the grand master, and I'm trying to make everything align to that, which is valid, like totally valid, and trying to get away from.
I mean, how do you get really super tight, other than practicing a lot as a band who's been together for forever, has played a click track? How do you get better than that? Well, post-process editing, moving the tracks around, making, their tom hits were slightly off of the beat. Okay, let's move them a little bit. That makes for a tight sound. So we're doing the same thing with sound alignment between subs, mains delays, but also instruments on the stage.
Well, and here's a really, like, you make a good point about time aligning the instruments to each other, because I always end up circling back to the changes that in-ear monitors have made to everything that we do, because especially the bigger and bigger the stage got. I mean, if you think about it, like the guys, whoever, the musicians on stage, were hearing all kinds of arrival times, because they're 30 feet away from the drummer acoustically, they're 5 feet away from their wedge, they're 40 feet away from the flown side fill, that all have kick drum in them.
Yeah, I've never understood that.
And they're trying to play in time to 4 different times that are coming to them, which means they're essentially playing to an average of them, and then everybody is playing to an average, which means nobody's precisely in time. You put in-ears in everybody's ear, and you put a click in everybody's ear, and now all of a sudden everybody is literally working off of exactly the same reference point. I mean, it's an interesting thing that I hadn't really thought about.
Mass effect, what's the word I'm looking for? Scene in a band instead of 2 speakers, it's like between instruments, between people, between events in time.
Right. No, and I as a musician, I'm actually, like, when I started playing with in-ears, and then when I started playing with a click track, and I've always been a rhythm guitar player, so I've always been kind of obsessed with time and obsessed with rhythm and now I'm beyond, as a musician, beyond obsessed with it, to the point where I play in a lot of churches, and a lot of volunteer drummers, their time is not great. And it's like this you get slightly off, and my head starts to, my eye twitches, but it's 20 years ago when I was playing to wedges or whatever, I was probably all over the place. But as as you're able to hear tighter and tighter and tighter, and get tighter and tighter, and then it's incumbent on us as engineers to be able to not screw that up when we combine all the sources together. Everybody's nodding their head. It's not a very interesting show when everybody's nodding their head.
I was going to say, when you get into timing snare to overhead, is something I always do, and you work the kit as around. But what you're talking about there is more of a input timing than a system timing, than output system timing. And honestly, with most of the stuff I do, it's kind of funny, because nowadays I would say 80% of the work that I do is all system engineered. So I'm only dealing with the outside of things. But yes, you end up having to, the drums is a great example of overheads timed to a snare and aligned properly. Set the mics up in the right distance and the right placement is paramount.
Well, and yeah, go ahead, Ike.
Well, I guess I could jump in here. I have some pretty probably radical, possibly really unpopular ideas on this front. So we'll just see what happens here. Okay. So first of all, I think a lot of times what you're timing to is actually a visual reference. And as a an example on, say, a corporate where you have a talking head standing at a lectern, and in theater, and particularly in theater, this is huge in theater, but you need to have the impression that the sound is coming from where you're seeing it coming from, which is the person speaking. And I mixed a theater show back in 1985. I mixed the Toronto production of Little Shop of Horrors, and I got a lot of volume complaints. And I thought, it's not loud. It is not, like, volume wise, it's not loud. But and I realized is that the PA was like a center cluster way up in the air, and people were hearing the sound come from up there. And I had an extra delay around that wasn't being used. I inserted it on the actors subgroup and dialed in about like 6.5 milliseconds. And man, you could punch that button in and out and make their voices locate downwards to where they were. So that was a huge, huge lesson for me, and a huge discovery. And it also, just like your eye starts twitching when you're working with the drummer, I would go to other theaters and other things around town here in Toronto and go, oh man, like that, they have to delay that cluster back down to the deck, So moving on from there, I think that like this thing where people say, well, if you don't like the timing of, the this to the this, move over a couple of seats or something. And my take on that is a measurement problem. And that we're talking about, in that situation, you're talking about arrival time, but it's not really what you're trying to fix in a PA system. What you're trying to fix is departure time. You're trying to get the sound to leave every driver at the acoustically the precise correct moment to replicate a waveform that is, say, originating at, say, the center of the stage. If you had a singer out there, if you could sort of envision their voice going out in sort of a conical way, that at a certain point their voice is going to hit, like, the bottom speaker in the stage left PA stack and the bottom speaker in the stage right PA stack. And that's the time that you're trying to get. And I haven't done a lot of this, but what I have done, and I've done the way I feel it should be, I've had very good results. And but again, getting people to kind of think about departure time versus arrival time. And the example that I'm starting to use is that, sound systems have been around for about almost exactly 100 years. Humans getting up in front of humans and entertaining or speaking or whatever has been going on for thousands of years. And I can pretty much guarantee you that at the amphitheater in Athens, 2,500 years ago, that people on stage were saying, well, if you don't like it how it sounds in, row alpha 3, that if you go to theta 6, you're going to hear what you want, because it was coming and it was going, and that was it. And so,
the challenge, I totally get your point, and I don't disagree with you, but I think the challenge is that we're starting to go back to the theoretical, this kind of theoretical perfect point source that has all the drivers in time alignment, that's all coming from one physical location. And that doesn't really match our reality, because if the space is too big, you can't reach to the back of the hall without killing the people in the front of the hall. And then you have, now you definitely have to make sure all the drivers in the box are all coherent and everything's coming out of there correctly. But then now I've got a delay speaker, because my only other choice is kill the people in the front so the people in the back can hear. And or I put up something big and giant and mono in the middle of the stage, and then all any of the writers want to write about is how YouTube threw away stereo. So
no, that's not really what I like to use the analogy of kind of ripples in a pond. And all I'm saying is that you want the departure time from any particular speaker to be at the point where its ripple would be happening after you drop the rock in the middle. So it's just kind of like, I'm not trying to come up with some theoretical, it can't be done kind of thing. I'm just trying to get people
I think
the
Ike brings up
idea.
a good point. Not to cut
Nathan?
you off. But so I read an article from Marilyn Von Veen, and he talks about, so typically you align a left and a right stack in the subs to front of house, right? You want it to sound good for you so you can mix for everyone. But he through statistics proved that it's actually better to align to the center of the audience on the left to right plane, even if you have mono or distributed subs, because you're going to get a better average for the group. And so it's like, well, what's your priority? Do you want it to sound good in one location or a small location, which would be like the kind of the center, or do you want it more distributed? And I think that's kind of the inverse thought, but it's the same kind of idea that you're getting at, Ike, is that it matters visually what we hear and see, and it matters that we align for a majority, not just certain people. Now, unless you have someone that's like, well, these are the money seats, we want these to sound the best, so we can make them sound the best.
Well, are you talking just PA alignment, or are you talking the subs to the PA?
Specifically, the article is on subs and PA, and so obviously that's one thing, and then once you have that correct, then you delay, you delay delays to that, and then the whole system to the stage, or however your process is. But the goal would be some sort of average, right? Like, you're not saying, well, if the drums is on the far right side, I'm not going to delay the left speaker and the right speaker to the right side of the stage left. And now, half the crowd hears things in the wrong, you know what I'm saying? Like, the right crowd is going to hear the drums, and they're going to hear the right main, and they're going to hear the left main a long time afterwards. That's not ideal.
You really
might do that towards the center.
Yeah, you have to look at left and right as the same dual mono. Yes, you're going to send different signals to them, but they're essentially a dual mono set as far as timing goes. When it comes to subs, then you get into a whole nother thing of
Dave Rat.
Yeah, well, Dave Rat's part of it, actually, and some of the stuff he's done is absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of different people.
You just need double the subs. I need all of the subs on the left side and the right side to handle all of the sound that I want for the entire crowd.
But exactly, are you?
It's all I have to do is just double the number of transducers I have.
More money, it's fine.
Just put up twice as much PA, it's fine. It'll be easy. We can get away from all that phase coherence by just putting up a band PA and a vocals PA, and we're done. Piece of cake.
I've always thought that would be kind of the holy grail, would be snare cluster, but distributed for mono for voices or whatever mono stuff you want, and then stereo stuff stays stereo. And
theater does split systems. On Broadway, the orchestra's coming literally out of one set of speakers that are actually in the same plane, physical horizontal plane, as the vocal speakers often. And sometimes they'll even do dual boxes. The same box will have multiple drivers in it, and the orchestra's coming out of some of those speakers, and the voices are coming out of some of those speakers. It's crazy.
Well, go ahead, finish. Sorry, I didn't
mean yeah, no, I think that's my point. But the other thing too is, theater is a different animal too. But typically, what I learned in theater from my mentor about time alignment was he would delay the mains back to the center of the stage. Or if it was a piece of theater where there was a lot of downstage action, he would do it a little closer to the downstage area. But that was an effort to do a few things. One is to get the PA to sort of disappear, because it's reinforcement, not amplification, reinforcement. So that's big, and
absolutely
that helps with that. And two is, and this is a trick that I've used because I'll put front fills in even if I don't need them, because I want to pull that image down, because it is really disconcerting to be in a front row and there's all this energy above your head when what you're seeing, and this goes to your point, Ike, you see people speaking or singing or whatever they're doing in front of you, and it's coming from here. It's just like weird. Our brains were never really designed for that, other than to listen to the Almighty. So, but that trick with front fills is great, and you just turn the front fills up and make them your 0. And I'm trying to remember if I play with, I do it by ear. I do that part by ear. I'm sure there's a way to measure it properly so that you get the imaging right, but it's usually like, it's not a lot of time. It's 5 or 10
Call that
milliseconds.
earballing it. You just kind of earball it.
Earballing. Yeah. Anyway, I'm done with that.
Yeah. No, I mean, you mentioned it. Ike mentioned it. I mean, I very distinctly remember the first time I was working with a big enough system with a center cluster and or a high enough PA or whatever. And that whole weirdness of, as soon as I got close to the stage, it just got super weird. And, the trick of delay that some so that it's less weird. That brings the level down. And yeah, I mean, I'd put up front fills for
Sorry, it brings the image down.
Yeah, the image down. Thank you. That's a much better expression. And I put in front fills for 10 people, and that's fine. It's literally just the few people in the very, very front, and they probably can't even hear them until I turn them off. And then it's suddenly, oh, my image changed, and it's weird.
How many times did someone come up to you and say, "Hey, those delay speakers aren't on"?
Right.
Because they're not used to hearing time alignment,
Yeah, that's the goal. It's
make it disappear. That's my whole thing.
I love that.
I wish more engineers just knew just some basics of, don't run the single XLR and loop every single speaker out. You have an X32, delay a few matrices. It takes 5 minutes.
Right.
Just by ear. Just turn it up, just please.
So we're getting into an interesting area here, which is the EAW 850 system. It's like a brute force system. I mean, it really is. It's like, and that's the problem. If you turn that thing up as loud as it will go, and you don't have feedback or anything like that, and you're indoors, you're just going to make the room, you're going to excite all this stuff in the room, right? Because there's just stuff bouncing everywhere at that point. It was bouncing there before, it just wasn't as loud. So the point, that's the whole thing about, line arrays, is you could get more, I don't know, in my opinion, you could get it to sound louder without being louder.
Right.
And if that's the case, then time alignment is more, I don't know, it's critical in both systems, but if the point source system is too loud, you can start to throw a lot of physics out the window because it's not going to work in your favor at that point. And that's where the time alignment thing is if you're exciting the room and there's so much reflected sound, all bets are off.
I think back to to that. I mean, if you had an 850 hang or something that was, say, 6 boxes wide or 8 boxes wide, just the physical distance between on stage box 1 and off stage box 2. I mean, that's the kind of thing. If I was dealing with that today, I would do a delay wrap, from inward to outward or whatever to time align them physically in space. And because that wasn't happening when those were being used, I mean, that was part of what you were hearing. I barely had contact with the 850s, but the one thing I picked up on right away is that they had this spare tire of mid-range that just wrapped entirely around the box. It was disgusting.
Yeah.
And in that same era, though, the first time I used an Adamson 225 mid-high box, that was the first box that I'd ever encountered anywhere that had actual complete pattern control. And I, of course, encountered it in a nightclub that only had a single stack per side and was wider than it, what those things covered. And there was no cheat at all. The sound was going wherever those boxes were pointing at and nowhere else. And all the times that you had a PA where you go, it's not quite right for the room, but it'll get there kind of thing. This was not that time.
Yeah, no, I mean, that is the one thing. As the tools have gotten more precise, we actually have to get it right. So I'm watching as Andy and the ninja are over there, and I can't even read their lips to know what it is they're talking about. So somebody's going to have to like share a little bit. Go ahead.
The dog's barking, of course.
Whatever. It's
that's why I stay muted.
It's all good.
Go ahead, Toby.
Well, I think it's important to for all of us to not overrate the visual component of the time alignment, and for me personally, I'm not really trying to time align to just the general backline, but to which component is being the loudest and interferes the most with my PA to the audience, right? I can align to a snare, but if I have 5 guitar amps in front of it, it doesn't make a difference to the audience. It's the guitar amps which make the difference. So, and I think we need to remind ourselves to not have a rule book and to use our ears every single show first before we make sure the visuals are in check. When the visuals are in check, that's a nice bonus. But a lot of times, especially at festivals, it's a simple thing that something is overpowering the front fills from stage, and the whole image audio-wise is out in place. So, and that's something which, I don't know if, we can give this to the audience right now, is, ears first in our job.
Yeah, I mean, it's, and the visual is like the drummer's the most easiest thing to see,
Yes.
And so that's just becomes, but then they put a stupid LED wall up and they IMAG the drummer, and now the IMAG is like 150 milliseconds late, and now we're destroyed again. It's like, I mean, but again, it goes to that whole, what do you time? The answer to this question is the answer to almost all the questions we ever talk about, which is it depends. Because as soon as you throw up an IMAG screen and you get a big enough space so that like most of the people are seeing stuff on IMAG, now we're timing to the screen. Like,
this is the problem, right? We have a problem where we put video up on the screen and people think, oh, they're not even really singing because the video is so delayed. You go, wow, that's not even a real show anymore yet.
Right, right.
And the video, so all the rest of it goes out the window.
And and I talk about this a lot, talking about doing lip sync, and doing broadcast and everything else. The video processing adds so much latency, which means that it's extremely prominent that we experience video behind audio. But in real life, we never experience visual behind audio. We experience just the opposite. If somebody 50 feet away from me yells at me and I see their mouth moving 50 milliseconds later or whatever, I hear it. Like, that's a natural thing. We're like, oh, we're okay with that. As soon as you flip those two, it's like you said, they're not even really singing. Like, that's not real. That's, your brain immediately goes to, that's not real. So we not only have to, delay to the video, in some cases we have to delay past that point because we're ending up trying to do some average in the audience that gets most of the audience in the general ballpark of in time with this video. And if we're a little behind the video, people barely noticed. But as soon as we end up ahead of the video, it's this whole kind of things don't. And that goes from, it's terrible when there's a drummer doing this and there's this great visual of out of time stuff. But even like, doing corporate and you've got somebody talking or video rolls or whatever, and, it can be a giant headache, and then sort of everything goes out the window as far as trying to time align it to the front fills or trying to, because now all of a sudden they've thrown a stupid video screen up, and then, you know, it's why I do like it in music when they turn the video screens into just special effects instead of like actually making it IMAG. Then everybody goes, oh, okay, it's a special effect. It's fine. Like they put a bunch of weird effects on stuff and make them all, you know, purpley and whatever, then it's fine. But when they actually try to do real IMAG, it's a mess. Ed, I always end up having to call on you. You need to interrupt more or put your hand up or something, because I know you have good things to say. So talk to us.
I mean, everybody pretty much covered things. When I'm doing music, I'll say when I first started aligning to my backline was when I was still doing much smaller rooms like clubs and stuff, where the stage might be 20 feet deep. So I wanted to align the PA to the drums because people could actually hear the acoustic drums. It wasn't a larger than life kind of situation. They were getting the acoustic instruments, the sound from the instruments off the stage too. So especially in the, you know, dead center in a wide staged room. I'd still do a lot of corporate AV things in ballrooms where we're putting speakers on sticks and they say, well, you can't have that speaker right next to the stage. It's got to go back against the drape. So now that becomes my zero, and my outer speakers are delayed to that plane. So there's all sorts of different situations. And then, you know, I may have delay speakers, and I always try to make my delay speakers as transparent as possible. I want people to not realize that they're even there, that they're doing anything. I want it to sound like it's coming from the stage, and it just is there, and they experience it more than they hear it. So that's kind of my take on those. But as everybody was saying before, you know, I when I've got subs and tops, you know, I'll align my subs to my hangs, and then I'll worry about what I'm going to delay it to on the stage. Corporate stuff, you know, I'm doing it to the speaker. If there's IMAG with the corporate, then it becomes tricky. But if there's IMAG to the corporate, I'm also usually doing a webcast with it. So I'm delaying for lip sync after it's gone through all the the video processing anyway. So yeah, it's just try to make sense of a soup of things, and it's always averages, as Nathan was saying. You know, like look for an average that's gonna work for everybody. And as Ike was saying, with the line arrays, it's just you do have to be a lot more precise, because the line array just to work is relying on a lot of precise summing of different drivers to make it seem like it's coming from one place. And you're always hearing more than one box, as I think you said, Brian. So it's just a dance that you're never going to make it perfect in every seat anyway. So
I was on a show once, and one of the like junior PA techs was messing around with the Meyer controller, and he accidentally turned off one box, and it happened to be the box that was aimed at front of house, like at the mix position. And I remember the mixer talking about it on the bus afterwards, and he said it just went away. He said he was amazed at how much that one box was the one that he was getting. So this thing about, and I don't get into it any more than that. I'm usually way behind them, and I don't know. So, but it was my impression that they actually didn't interact very much, and that a big part of making them work was getting your angles right so that you weren't having gaps between them and you weren't having overlap, because of the fact that they're so directional. So, I mean, I could be wrong about that, but that was my impression.
Well, I mean, definitely in the high frequency, you're getting they're directional, but once you start getting in that mid range, they're lobing. That's I mean, how they can have such better efficiency, you know, in for the whole thing. That, you know, it's all the summation of the mids. But yeah, the high frequencies are definitely very directional. I experience that all the time.
My experience with line arrays has been that it's magic voodoo sauce, and I don't fully understand it. So, I mean, I understand it in the most like basic, you know, conceptual kind of way. The reality is that I don't 100% fully understand it. I do know that there is constructive intentional interference between the boxes to create the effect. And part of the way I know that is from setting up one of the very first big boy line array systems, which was an EAW 860 rig. And, you know, and it was a processor and a whole bunch of amplifiers. And it was the very first time it ever literally come out of the cardboard boxes on the show site. And, you know, the process of kind of dialing in all the things, and my big takeaway from it was everything except exactly right as far as the time alignment of all the different components. Everything other than exactly right was awful. Like awful, like the worst PA you ever heard, until the summation was correct and the interference was working correctly. And then it became one big box. And then it was like, this is amazing. But I'd never experienced, like, you know, a point source box, a 3-way trap box, a 5-way whatever. You know, you play around with the processing, it get a little better, a little worse, or whatever. This was sort of it's got to be exact. They've got to be interfering in just the right way to create just the right effect, to do just the right thing. And that's, you know, and as we've gone farther and farther down that road, you know, the manufacturers are putting more, like every single transducer on a separate amplifier channel, so they can take it right down to the transducer level, and then they can just basically change the delay interference and steer the whole thing down and steer it up, and, you know, and that's a whole nother, you know, crazy thing. Go ahead, Andrew.
Oh, you're touching on something too that I learned a while back, is when line arrays got popular, they were getting used in places they shouldn't have been.
Oh, sure.
One of my theater,
yeah,
and one of my mentors, who was a theater sound designer here in San Francisco, he showed me at our local major theater here, ACT, that because he had EAWs up, he had 3 sets of them up the proscenium, and line arrays in that theater were not a good choice, except for a center fill. That was a good choice, where there were some line arrays for musicals and stuff. But because the balcony, the distance between the proscenium, the front of the proscenium, and the first balcony wall is not a long distance.
Right.
So to try and aim and get line arrays under there, and there were occasionally, there was, I think, traveling shows that would do that because that's what they were carrying or whatever. Anyway, point is that he showed me, like, this is why a point source trapezoidal box is the right thing here.
Right.
In a bigger room, yeah, maybe a line array, but not here. And that was a revelation, because everybody was touting line arrays can do this for you, that for you, and all that. Yes, but they can't do this, which is a short throw where you don't need laser accurate pattern control. You need some pattern control, but you just need it to fill this area. You're not going to turn up that speaker very loud, and then it works for you.
Well, and you brought up the perfect, like, my memory's not great, but I want to say it was National Theater, it might have been Warner Theater. I don't even remember the show. I just remember it was the first time that I worked a show in there with a big boy line array rig. I don't even think I was the A1 on it. I just have this distinct memory of having to put up a ridiculous number of boxes and have them arrayed in this weird, like, strange upward pointing, downward pointing, and ultimately it was like we could have just put an 850 and an 8.1 at the balcony, put one down, you know, with a little separation, and put one below the balcony, and we'd have been done, and it would have sounded fine. Or, you know, or pick a better point source box or later. But it ended up being like, you know, 12 or 13 boxes to try to do this, because it was just not the right tool for the job. Which is, you know, there's one of my audio opinion show things that we haven't run yet is point source versus line array, which is a great discussion that does tie in somewhat to timing. Speaking of timing, we're coming close to the end of our time. See how I did that? I'm getting so good at this. But does anybody have any other? Because I actually thought of like 5 other things that, so when we talk about this subject again, I do think that we basically all came to the conclusion that what you time things to depends, because it always does. It's like, is it theater? Is it music? Is it corporate? Do you have control? Oh, I know the one thing I was going to add, which was just adding on a little bit to what Ed was saying, because I do so much corporate stuff, and so many times I can't put the speaker where it should be. Like, they just won't let me put this. The number of things I did the last 2 years, there seemed to be like everybody wanted to do the thrust stage, short throw, thrust stage, and in a room I can't fly speakers. And now I've got people on this thrust stage in this short room, and the only place I can put speakers is like on the outside of the screens facing the audience, this from like headphones. And the imaging thing, Ike, was just, it drove me batty. And, trying to put front fills and then trying to, it's just a mess. But so, it depends. It's like in those cases, sometimes I did some really crazy things where I was over delaying these outfill speakers, even though they were covering probably 75% of the room. I was over delaying them to de-emphasize them, so at least anyone who was picking up any of the front fill whatsoever, their attention would be drawn towards, or even if they heard acoustically, that their attention would be drawn to the front, even though they only let me put, aura cubes as front fills because they didn't want anything big. But anyway,
that's a great subject for a future show, is like breaking rules. Because
right.
I've done that same thing where I've delayed and you're not supposed to do that. That's your 0, is that front plane. But if you don't want that speaker that's over here, like you got people looking that way and there's a speaker here.
Yeah, but it's only your 0 if you're taking like the proscenium or whatever is times 0.
No, that's a good point.
A visual reference, maybe when you think about, even if it's behind the speaker, if it takes time for the sound to get out to the walls, I have heard sound pan out. I went to a theater show not long after Little Shop wrapped here. It was, the PA was a couple of Bose 802s sitting on their lids on stage left and stage right. And there wasn't a lot of reinforcement, but when one of the characters got loud enough to excite the PA system, you could actually hear the sound pan out to the speakers visually. And
right.
So it's, again, I think a lot of it has to do with the visual reference
Sure.
and then making the sound arrive to match what people are seeing.
So Ike, I'm writing down. Go ahead, Ed. While I'm writing down.
Well, like Andrew was saying with theater, we pay a lot of attention to the psychoacoustic effects, like the Haas effect. That's something that the theater I do some work at. They teach design tech, so they're teaching sound design to people, and that's one of the things that they hammer into them is, where is the sound coming from? Where is that image looking? How do you calculate that with your center? Because mostly dialogue is just center, music's in the left, rights, and take into account how high your hang is to arrive at what delay time you need to put on that to make it sound like it's coming off the stage.
Which is huge. So what I'm going to do is I'm literally making a topic that's essentially psychoacoustic effects and how we use them, which is a whole different discussion that's timing related, but that's a great place for us to end with a teaser for the show to come. But thanks to everybody for taking your time out on a Thursday afternoon, night, depending on where you are, to hang out with us. It's always a pleasure. And thanks to anybody on YouTube that watches this. We much appreciate you. And with that, I think we will sign ourselves off.
Bye-bye, boys.
Have fun storming the castle.
Think it'll work?
It'll take a miracle.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.